Okay, so I'll start that again, because you're probably all covering your ears with how loud that was. Nowhere in our preparation for Living Liquid, which we did a lot of, did we ever ask ourselves, what if we fight the hand the whole time? We prepped for jail, we prepped for two-hand phase, we prepped for a lot of things. But none of those things were, what if the whole phase is two target? So it was a huge shock to us when this happened. That's, you know, a lack of foresight on our part, but also, I think, an interesting twist on the way that they made this phase. Right, so it's fairly straightforward. Everyone knows how this phase works, right? If you're watching streams, you've seen this more than 100 times. You've seen it 1,000 times. We abuse our triple ranged comp here, and you can see the way that we fan out is very good for positioning. We just wanted to get the hell out of the middle at the start of the fight and really utilize all the safe spot around the edge. I think our strat wouldn't really work very well for double melee because one of them would be instantly fed. So anyone looking to emulate this will need to adjust it because of the fact that our composition is triple ranged. Double caster is very powerful here. The other reason that double caster is really powerful here is that you'll see Mana Ward, Titan Shield and Shade Shift all go up during this phase, just because we're so spread out and taking so much damage. Better without music? I'm going to turn it down even further. Right. I'm sorry, I literally just reinstalled Windows, so my settings are all over the show, so perfect. Okay. Yeah, so anyone looking to emulate our phase here is going to be running into space issues unless they're running... actually, let's do something real quick. Here we go. Unless they're also running a triple ranged comp, both in terms of the spacing that the players are spread out to, requires a little bit extra than they can be healed, and the positioning of the dolls themselves that don't feed to the hands while we move the bosses around is very specific. I don't think this is a very optimized phase, but it's something that was very easy for us to execute, and so we kept on doing it. Right? You don't change something that isn't broken, and unless there was inconsistencies here, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. A lot of people have problems with the Yag dolls. You'll see a little secret, and it's called cancelling your casts and playing very safe when you do it, and that's just what you have to do. The DPS check in this phase is not difficult at all, so play it safe. Don't int your dolls. Every wipe to dolls is an absolute waste of time. Reset your combo, etc, etc, etc. Yeah, so that's why it's kind of spooky, right? Where I'm minipping in through the puddle, which I only died to once in all of Prague, by the way. I got dropsy ticked once. There's a cleave at the time, so it's all very movement specific and timing, but we made it work. This was where we ran into the first real problem. Right there. Because Sindolf would die. Every damn time. Sindolf just got murdered. We didn't figure it out for, 4 or 5 pulls that it was actually coming from Living Liquid, and it was always north. We jumped around the idea of, is he always shooting one at the hand, because the hand was always up there. We jumped around the idea of, is it a forced tank swap by putting one on the main tank at the time? Nope. It's just a forced north wave. And unfortunately we didn't look at our footage well enough for this, which meant that our progression through this phase was kind of slow. But we got there eventually. I like that the way this functions with the short duration vulnerability. What it means is that tanks can't cheese stuff, because this is the first sort of time that you are introduced to the fact that, and I'm not sure if it works here, but it's certainly a thing later on, that by trying to use invulns on vulnerability, when you've been obviously made vulnerable to an ability, and then you get hit again, it'll kill you through invulns most of the time, or tank LB. Hey, thanks. They worked here. I think it might have worked here, so we were invulning this for a while until we figured it out. But it is a thing that happens further on throughout the fight. I'm not sure, too sure of how the tanks and healers found this phase. I think the healers had a lot of issues though to begin with because of the amount of damage and the spacing that we were using. Like I said, this phase was not optimized at all. It was just a temporary solution to a problem. So that was where we really ran into the first problem of the fight. These drainage tethers are enormous, by the way. We learned pretty quickly to pay them a lot of respect. There were deaths to those, it was unfortunate, but I assume that we should have been more prepared for that. We played this early phase, I think, pretty poorly. It was more of a warm-up for us, but we got through it in a reasonable time. You know, dying to things like getting cleaved by a tether is kind of unacceptable. Yeah. Cool, then this part happened. And you see six throttles going out. There you go, got the screenshot for you. And this is, yet again, another thing that we didn't prep for. The idea of multiple throttles, and we actually had a couple of wipes because healers hadn't sorted out priorities for it. Just a simple lack of foresight here meant that we were slow through this phase. There being full uptime on 2 targets, dolls being in this phase, and 6 throttles, north wave. All of these things tripped us up a little bit because we didn't prep well enough, or we weren't imaginative enough, or we weren't fast enough to solve these problems. And that's a lesson to take forward. Think of all the possible scenarios and be prepared for them ahead of time, so that when you are surprised by something, you know, well, there's going to be less of those. 6 throttles is easy enough. By this time we had a bard. We actually zoned in initially with a dancer, and it took maybe 4 or 5 pulls for us to rezone with a bard, because dancer was making dolls inconsistent. There's a lot of finagling to be done, and you know, the moral of our team is turn your brain off, right? You want to think as little as possible about your job so that you can, you know, execute on the fight. And having to think about changing dancer's rotation and playing things differently and very case specific takes away from that. You know, it puts your mind on your job as opposed to on the fight. Exactly, Jinx. Lower your thoughts per second. So we came back in here with a bard, and bard also helps with the throttle phase by focusing on the people who are going to be in the middle of the healers' target lists. So one of them will go, if you go tanks, healers, DPS in that order, one of them will go top bottom, one of them will go bottom to top. So Phantom would just minuet. Is it minuet? Minay? No. Pay in. He would pay in one of the center targets. Just, you know, clean that up a little bit, as well as the 2 target cleave was so much better. In terms of damage control here, I'm not sure if other groups have had much of a problem. I think we had maybe a handful over the entirety of Prague of wipes, which were due to hand and living liquid damage imbalance. I locked the orchestrion. Hang on a sec. I think if I make you a tenant, you can mess with my music. Let me do that real quick. How do I do that? Shared estate settings. There we go. So we're going to have DJ Bell on the jukebox right now. Wait, I just evicted you. Fuck, sorry. There you go. Okay, so you should be able to mess with that now, Layla. Okay, we've gotten through the throttles. Unfortunately, I'm one of the last ones every time, so if the healers get behind, it's me who dies. I already had this on. Okay, phase is nearly over. I was saying before that we never really had too much of a problem with DPS discrepancy here. This phase is a lot about controlling your damage. And the best place to practice that before you go into this fight is A8 Savage. The robots phase is an incredible phase for controlling your damage, where having too big a discrepancy in the mob's health can create really big issues when you get to the end of the phase with the way that they enrage. The killing and feeding of dolls, also very, very important. Like, all of these things are instant wipes if you get them wrong, right? So learning when to hold DPS, how to prioritize DPS, and just manage doing high damage across multiple targets in a safe way is super important. This is not a phase to be greeding out in. Like, after you've got your third, fourth clears, and absolutely you should be coming back to this phase and looking to pump as much as you can and working out strats to allow you to play balls to the wall and really go for it. But until then, there is absolutely no reason to ever risk a wipe in Living Liquid to you pushing more damage. And I've seen a lot of it, because ever since we cleared my group, because we were organized for about 2 weeks off, we've been watching a ton of streams, right? A ton of streams. And I have seen so many Living Liquid wipes to DPS greed and just misplaying around this phase because all people care about is damage. Play safe, play smart. Don't wipe your team in Living Liquid, it is so, so bad for morale. Right. Carrying on. These mechanics here, the Proteans with the wave Proteans, were actually really cool. I think it looks really, really incredible if you sit back and watch the team movement. And I like mechanics like that because it's also happening in a very active phase, right? Like, you're still hitting 2 targets with tank damage going out while doing this dance, and that's the type of movement and precision that I expect out of an ultimate fight. This sort of complexity in the opening phase of a fight is exactly what I expected, and it woke us up really hard. We were saying immediately, this is very hard. You compare this to Garuda or Tuntania, and Living Liquid just slaps them both. Comparatively, the damage taken, except for maybe the friction section of Garuda phase, is so much higher in Living Liquid compared to those two sort of phase ones. And the precision of movement needed is also much, much higher. It really makes Tuntania feel like the snooze fest that it is. Again, you'll see delaying GCDs, playing really safe. That's what it takes to be consistent sometimes. There's really not much more to be said for this. I know that people are now just zerging Living Liquid before the final Hand of Pain. That's absolutely fine if it's consistent. If it's not, do not do it. Oh, we also didn't talk about these guys. The Embolists were actually quite a learning curve because they can randomly spawn, so we had to plan movement for the bosses based on all the possible angles that the balls could come from, right? When I say randomly spawn, it can be from 2 of the 3 funnels. I'm not sure if there's a rule to it or a pattern, but we wanted to find a way very quickly that we could do it so that we never have to worry about it. And the movement that we came up with ended up being that. But there were a couple of times when you get to the end here and these balls are coming right at the boss and you gotta kill them really quickly. A little spook. I've also seen clips of balls bouncing off walls and all kinds of scary stuff, so that's not too fun. Right. As soon as you see limit come out, you are terrified. If you think back and compare what's about to happen right here to the transitions from phase 1 in UCOB or UWU, the points of comparison you have are... What has happened to my music? Ifrits, you know, go to a safe spot, very easy, and Heaven's Fall, which is, I'd say, slightly harder, but nothing compared to this. This is an actual positioning and timing nightmare. The first time you see this is just, it's overwhelming and you have a lot to learn, just from the get-go. So we'll run through this one time and then we'll break down what we did here to make this really simple on ourselves. We've seen a lot of strats for this, and I don't think there's going to be a more simple one than what we do, which is literally run in a circle, right? Okay, very simple. Everyone knows how limit cut works, yeah? It goes 1 through 8. It'll slash the odds, then dash at the evens. It'll knock back anyone with the slash, and if you're not facing it with an even, the way that it dashes, you'll be knocked back. Also important to note that it spawns behind the odd. But there's also the optical sights going on at the same time, and that's what makes it difficult. But you can use that to your advantage. So what we do is we have 1, 2, 5, 6 north, 3, 4, 7, 8 south. That means that the slash and dash are always going to be on alternating sides, giving the people who are going second and third, the second set of our slash and dash on their side, have time to get ahead of the first one after it's gone off. So you'll see what I mean in a second. So you keep running into the one that's just gone off, and you do it ahead of the people who are going second. So in this example, myself and Raimi here, we're the second set on the south side. This is the first set on the south side. And you can do it all within the space of one optical sight safe zone. An optical sight, after it goes off at one of these lines, won't hit this again, so you treat these intersections here like the slices of the pizza. That's how far each optical sight will move you. Triple caster fire fort. I think it was Keo who initially pointed out that these slices or these wedges are the key to this mechanic, really. And this is a very good picture of it. You can see right here. It covers exactly 2 wedges each time, and it moves across one each time it rotates. So it makes your movement very, very controlled. On the other side of the arena though, who's over there? I don't think we'll have a POV for that. But on the other side, the timing's a little different. So we had to learn the timing that happens on the 1, 2, 5, 6 side, as well as the timing on the 3, 4, 7, 8 side. So that was a little bit of a hurdle for us, but I think our strategy is very, very consistent and safe. It's just a learning curve. I would recommend this to people because I've seen ones where you have multiple people doing multiple different roles and running across the center, and I think keeping it really simple is almost always the correct answer. So you can operate everything within the space of one little slice there. Very simple. These here, these magic and physical vulns, are what makes this mechanic hard, by the way. It means that there's no room for error. If someone dies, a limit cut is going to go stray and it can just kill everyone instantly. It's a very high level of punishment, which I am happy to see. I wasn't expecting that type of punishment out of a transition phase with no uptime and ultimately no bearing on the fight, because it doesn't feel very impactful, right? In the same way that Ifrit's eruptions into well, Radiant Plume I think it's called, into his charge. Doesn't feel very interactive or very impactful in the fight. It's just a means of getting from phase 1 to 2. But this one is just incredibly hard, incredibly punishing, and actually has a learning curve to it. It's not simply identify the safe zone, it's a series of movements which, it goes to show the difference in execution required and the amount you need to learn. Can't even Asuna it? Yeah, absolutely, you can't Asuna it anymore. Speaking of can't Asuna, I like how in the expansion that they remove fake harass, they add in 6 throttles at once. So now we're on to this, and just that J-kick is by itself like kind of a wake-up call, because you've just come out of a high movement phase which has consistent damage going out, and you can have random targets at the end taking damage, so you need to get middle afterwards, and you need to top, and you need to be ready for a darkness damage J-kick. I think it's darkness, I haven't actually looked at the log of it to make sure, but J-kick is historically darkness damage, it hurts. And you'll see another reason coming in right here why smoothing out this transition was very good with our composition. Right? I think we all still habitually press the buttons we didn't need to, which is, here it is, Mana Ward, Shade Shift, and Earthen Ward. Right? It's just having that tankiness from your DPS makes the healer's job so easy every time you get to a new phase. You're taking a lot of burden off of them while they familiarize themselves with a phase, so that you can then take it away later, put it on the next phase, and just consistently move those abilities up throughout the fight. So we're only at the second phase, and we've already got, well, we're only just getting to the second phase, and we've already got our scripted second instance of a defensive cooldown from all DPS. Darkness? Yeah, so darkness damage is, there's 3 types. There's physical, there's magic, and there's darkness. Physical is obviously reduced by things that reduce physical damage. I don't really think there's any left in the game now, but they can be parried, they can be blocked, and they can usually crit too. Some things can't. Magic damage can only be reduced by magic damage affecting things. So things like Dark Missionary, how it says it only reduces magic damage, things like Dark Mind. And darkness damage can only be reduced by things that say reduces damage by X%. So things like tank cooldowns, right? So that's why effective HP, things like Mana Ward, is very, very effective against darkness damage. Riddle of Earth, another good defensive CD. Riddle of Earth gets more value as the damage values go up, but because this doesn't one-shot you at the HP levels we have, the shields are better. Right. Big fucking damage. That hurts. And again, something else we weren't prepared for. A phase 2 2-target fight. So we're only a few minutes into the fight right now, and we've had entirely full uptime of 2 targets or more. We pretty quickly learned that Summoner and Bard were going to be essential to this fight. The ability to multi-target is insane. Ninja does very well in this as well because of their 2-target cleave has been, always very strong, and it just got buffed even more in 5.1. And Black Mage does very well against 2 targets as well, especially when bosses are split. The ability to maintain Thundercloud procs coming from 2 targets is very, very important for this phase, just for the extra movement and the ability to wiggle around as much as you want. Machine is too, yeah, exactly. Phantom said it quite bluntly on Mog Talk that you're trolling if you're not taking Bard, and I'm in agreement with him that this fight, especially the earlier phases, are so Bard favored that it's almost a hindrance to not bring it. Same goes for Summoner, right? So at this point, you can already lock in 2 of your roles. You can say my range DPS is going to be a Bard, my caster DPS is going to be a Summoner, we need a melee, and we need a something else. And Ninja Black Mage just go well. Ninja is very synergistic with the rest of the jobs here, and Black Mage is, you know, I'm just a Black Mage one trick, so that's why I'm here. Sad you use Machinist. Yeah, okay. So when I say you're trolling by not bringing it, or you can't, like you shouldn't do it, it's not to say you can't. If you have a team who is interested in bringing that along, or you don't want to play anything else, by all means go for it. That said, you will have less room for error and a higher level of execution required for clearing these phases. And making things consistent, especially at the start of this fight, is very, very important. So it may take you longer to smoothen that out, which will lead to either longer progression time or just a harder progression cycle where you have just a bigger execution requirement. Right, so it doesn't take long before we see some pretty, you know, iconic abilities, Whirlwind just being raid-wide damage, and then we all shit ourselves because Judgment Missy is being cast about 10 seconds into a phase. And we actually had a discussion before this fight came out that if we see the ability, the cast bar for Judgment Missy, and we don't know how we're interacting with it, and we don't know when we're interacting with it, and we don't know when it resolves, we're dropping it. And for the first... until the first time we saw Gavel, we just dropped the ability. Missy was not planned for in our initial movements, but we just wanted to gather information. We're lucky that Missy was a very cohesive, I want to say, mechanic in this fight, and in this phase particularly, because it lines up with everything else that goes on. It doesn't make you think outside the box, and it doesn't really make any mechanics jarring in the way that it did in A4S, where you would have very awkward lineups and timings of the way that things would interact with each other, where you had to very specifically pass at odd times and force high stacks onto certain people at different times of the fight. It was very organically solved in that the times you wanted to pass it were the best times for the phase. It also barely does any damage. Yeah, you're right, it does only like a couple thousand damage a tick. It's more of a don't forget this is here for too long, okay healers. Mostly a damage taken problem in A4. It was mostly a damage taken problem in A4, but it's also... A4 has more positioning checks in this phase. Things like Carnage 0 and Carnage, along with Missy, means that accidental passes are a lot easier to happen. This only really has the lightning and water for the DPS to move around between, and we have our healers do the ranged bait. Everything else is boss positioning, so it felt like accidental passes were almost impossible if you were being attentive and alert. So Judgment Missy goes out, and you'll see in a minute what I mean about very organic passes happening. So this is where the first time you see the chakrams, and I think the way that the chakrams worked was kind of a gimme almost. The fact that they always spawn opposite each other is almost too free. It meant that dodging them is very, very simple, and the mechanic kind of resolved itself all at once. It's very... I guess the word I'm looking for is... it makes sense in the big scheme of the dance that's going on here, but it also means that there's not much thought that ever has to go into it. You just dodge away from the chakram and then rotate around if you need to. Only by a touch. Expect them to be introductory as well? Yeah, I thought so too. The chakra mechanic was, I think, underutilized, but they had to make an appearance. Chakram into Optical Sight. Of course, this one's going to be baited, because if they decided to give us the, you know, the Shiva one or the center one, that would be too easy. Right? The whole point of Missy existing as a mechanic is we're trying to control where you can stand and where you can't stand. It's all about, real estate and forcing people to do mechanics in a way that is very mindful of where you are running. So if you're giving, like a center optical sight, which means just get to the wall, that's too easy. So a baited one is far more obvious, and we knew that the first time we got there. We saw an optical sight going out and we knew that it was a targeted bait. But like I said, along with the chakrams happening at the same time, it's a very self-resolving mechanic, right? The chakram may as well not exist for all this little dance is. Oh, you'd like the chakrams to be treated like exaflare? Yeah, that would have been more difficult. I'd like that. Okay, and like I said, the Missy pass is being very organic. You've just done the movement dance. Nothing's going on. There's, very light damage coming out with the ticking and a 1 HP mechanic, which is, just a healer check. It's make sure everyone has shields up. And very organically, the Missy passing timing happens. And also very organically, the next set of mechanics happens. This is a very, very scripted phase in terms of when everything's going to happen, which makes it feel like it's almost too controlled. I would have liked to see a little more chaos in here. Maybe if the timers didn't align so nicely, maybe the Missy was down to 30 seconds as well, would really tighten the leeway on Missy passes, make sure that everything is very exact and crisp and precise. But you have a little bit of leeway because the Missy is 36 seconds, I believe. Or even putting the Missy down to 25 seconds would have made it very hard as a phase. I don't know exactly how that would line up, I'd have to look at it, but I felt that the timing on the mechanics was too free. So you'll see that the way we move is all very scripted. Everyone has a lane. So running around this area, Shin's lane, around the back of the room, down the bottom. It's Phantoms and Ara was, functioning around this part of the room here. Healers tend to just stay out of the middle after this part, and you got Brian's zone down here with Cruise Chaser and Sindel's zone up here with Brute Justice. Triple ranged was again super helpful here because when it comes to managing space for mechanics, the less you have to worry about being on the boss, the better. Lightning and water. Everyone knows how these resolve. If you've done a lot of practice in A8 and A6, lightning and water is very intuitive to you by this point. And the way that it even resolves itself, I mean, there's a lot of decision trees that you can go down for the way that you resolve the lightning in particular. But we thought it does a lot of damage, put it on the tank because they're getting healed anyway. It also means that the tank doesn't have to worry about being in or out of water soaks all the time, and it keeps things very static, which I think is very important. Making a strat around things being as consistent as possible every time, given the RNG of who the water's on, who the lightning's on, makes a lot of sense. Mechanics resolve, and then in nice timing, the next mechanics come out. This one's called something missile, I forgot the name of it. Anyway, it's off my screen at the moment, down to the bottom. But essentially it's a few range baits. There's going to be a sludge puddle dropped under two people, the two furthest from Brute Justice, and then 2 hidden mines placed under those people shortly after. So pretty much all it means is be moving, don't drop the mine in the sludge, and let the tank go over and soak the hidden mines. Missile command, that's it. And you see enumeration for the first time as well, and it only took a couple of pulls to realize that it's always going to be a 3. Another kind of gimme of a mechanic, right? It always being 3 means that, again, you have less variance, less to react to, more consistency. Changing this number would have slowed down prog for literally everyone. It means that the healers and the tanks could have potentially had to worry about their positioning as well more in this situation. More reactivity brings more chaos, and the more chaos there is in this phase, the harder it's going to be. And just because of the way that everything plays out in here, I think it's not chaotic enough. So the way that these enumerations work is that they're on 2 DPS, so you just have a priority system. You can number your DPS 1 to 4, and then assign them left and right. So I'm number 3, so that means if 1 and 2 both get an enumeration, I slide over to the left. Right, makes sense. That resolves itself, oops. And then, again, organically, the timing for the Missy pass happens. Right? It almost feels too easy in the timings that you have for the Missy passes, right? Like we were trying to map this out and we realized that every time you've just done a mechanic, you pass Missy, then you go do another mechanic. And that really is kind of the flow. It makes it feel very, very stable and controlled when that was never really what Missy was. It was about trying to stabilize something that was very difficult to deal with. In case you missed it, because I didn't bring it up as well, during the missile command there is the ice that has to be placed by a random tank, which is why we tanked the bosses in this formation here with Cruise Chaser, who was a little bit further up this way, so that Brian could potentially get the ice and place it to freeze the water and get the hidden mines down the bottom of the room here. Missy mechanic is easier than it was in A8S. The one in A8S wasn't the same Missy that we had in A4S. I think the Missy we had in A4S was much harder. 1 due to the damage, and 2 due to the pentacle mechanic, which never showed up in this fight. With the standard 2 melee comp, would it have made the Missy strategy that much more difficult? I wouldn't say difficult, I'd say it would take a longer time to adapt to. But that doesn't mean that it's more difficult. It just means that there's extra factors to consider in your movement patterns that may have meant more downtime, less damage overall. But execution-wise it would have been similar, just more annoying, I guess. I guess you could call that more difficult if that's what you consider, but ultimately this made it very free for us. Not downtime until you're comfortable. Yeah, exactly. It's got an HP percentage difference threshold. So it doesn't have an HP percentage difference threshold, but it does have a quote-unquote core hounds-like mechanic, where if one of them dies, the other one will start channeling his enrage. Very similar to the robots phase in A8S, where if one of the last 2 dies, the other one starts his enrage, which if you don't kill them together at the same time, you have a very small window of time in which to finish the other one off. Or you die. Well, reference. I actually, ever since I joined your team, you'd refer to those sorts of mechanics as core hounds, and I didn't know firsthand what core hounds meant. I had to sort of, take it from context, what it meant when you said that, but now I know firsthand. MMO mechanics, brought to you by Klops GG. So now you'll see exactly the same again. Water and lightning, now being resolved with the tank and healer with the lightning, and everyone who didn't have water right now. This part is where Missy actually becomes a little bit difficult, because you have to play reactively, because there is randomness thrown in. Not only is there randomness in who gets what at the start, there's randomness in what you get now when Verdict is cast. And this is part 1 of the Gavel mechanic. So Gavel is always been called Gavel, but I think it should really be called Verdict, because that's the thing that decides how everything goes, right? Gavel is just the resolution, everything coming together. Because it's the Verdict cast that actually makes things difficult. And here it is. Layer 2 of RNG. So this is where you get your requirements for passing the Gavel cast. So you'll see that the Nissis that all went out have a different colour. There's the blue, the green, the purple, and the orange. Yes, orange on Sindolf, who's under the boss. And the requirements for Gavel, the ones with the little exclamation points on them if you can see it. I think I'm streaming in 1080, so everyone should be able to see that well enough. That means you need that colour of Nissi to succeed Gavel. We all already knew what this debuff, the 3, meant from the initial Gavel and A8S. It's simply you need 3 debuffs to succeed. I was a little let down that it was this only counts specifically Gavel debuffs, because maintaining 3 debuffs specifically while you've got water and lightning debuffs at the same time would have been very difficult to figure out and execute. So in A8S, not all of the debuffs are these ones here, the Gavel specific ones, right, where they've got the bar on top. I would show you an example of it, but I don't have it on hand, but it counts other things as well, things like the Cyclone. When you eat that, you get a wind debuff, which means you die to the next one you take. And that counts towards Gavel, but not here. They could have done more with this, but the way that they tried to make this difficult is, like I said earlier, by mixing up and making you play reactively to what you need and what you have. So if you go back to the start of the phase, which I didn't actually talk about when it happened, there are 2 ways that this Judgment Nissi can happen. It can either go on all tanks or all DPS. And the way that this happens means that you have to play reactively later on in terms of whether you're collecting or distributing Nissi to the person needed. Right, so in this example it went on all the tanks and healers, so the same thing happens later on. We have to go get it from the tanks and healers. But in the permutation where all the DPS get it at the start of this phase, it's the other way around. Where did we get to? Oh, I just went too far forward. Did I? No. We'll go through this again. Enumeration. I've got the timestamp, sorry. Right. Water and Thunder resolving. Verdict being cast. This is where we identify what you need and who has it. So this is the dream situation, right? I need orange. Sindolf needs orange. Sindolf has orange. Is enumeration always 3? Yeah, throughout the entire fight it's always 3. I also thought that was a little bit of a letdown, but it's whatever. Ultimately it doesn't matter. You adjust to it, and it may make that learning process a little bit slower. 1 or 2 pulls, it may throw 1 or 2 more pulls away throughout the entirety of it, but it's pretty simple. So yeah, I got the dream layout with Sindolf here, where I need to collect the orange from him, and then I need to give the orange back to him later on. If you look at anyone else though, you'll see it's very different. You'll see that Brian has the blue that Shin needs, but Brian needs purple. So it means that you have a 2-step process there to 1, get the blue from Brian, and then 2, give the purple to Brian. Brian is super peasant. Nobody calls him by his in-game name. So ideally you want this, but unfortunately most of the time it's that you have to collect from someone that you need it from. So Shin would collect from Brian because he needs the blue, and then who has purple here? Kyo has purple. So then Phantom would collect from Kyo, and then in the next pass he would give to Brian. Right, so it's a little 2-step where you are getting what you need and then giving someone else what they need, and it's all based around the timers of the mechanics, and it happens organically again, and it's very simple. It's a neat mechanic, but it is self-resolving. The difficulty in it is being able to identify in this massive debuffs that you can see. And it actually took a while for us to find a strategy which actually made that very easy, which was simply tanks and healers communicate it while the DPS are doing mechanics. because we assign the DPS to effectively do all the passing, right? The tanks and healers have other things to worry about. So the DPS were doing all the movement and all of the physical passing of the debuffs. That simplified this and really made it more consistent for us. But even when you're doing that, having to adjust to multiple layers of RNG, which are the color that you get at the start, the color that you need at the end, and the color that or who you need to get it from, it's a lot to take in when you first get here, which is the sort of difficulty that I was expecting throughout the rest of the phase. Right, so mine and Sindelf, like I said, resolves very easily. I collect it from him. And then we do the last lightning and water. So the timing for this, actually, oh sorry, I'm one ahead of myself. I think we're almost done. Oh no, this is the last lightning and water. So the timing for this is all exactly the same it is for the rest of it. And the reasoning for that this phase happens so organically, I think is due to the 30-second timer on the lightning and water debuffs. I was talking earlier about how a different timer on the Gavel, the Missy, would have made things very, very different and more difficult. But that's only if you do it in relation to the lightning and water. The lightning and water soaks is really what sets the pace for this whole phase, because you absolutely have to do those in very set locations every single time. And everything else sort of revolves around that. So it's a matter of how can we do everything else while managing to be in the positions we need to at very set times, and then you build from there. That's actually one of the sort of core philosophies in the way that I break down mechanics personally, is what do we know for certain about this phase, and how can we build around that. Something that was really, really important when doing Wormhole, which we'll get to later on, but reducing the number of things that you have to plan and adapt to, not adapt to, but that you have to manage yourself in terms of timing is really, really, I think, key, by just creating constants for yourself to then build around. Right, so here goes the second part of the mine and Sindelf's interaction, where I give it back to him because it's the one he needs. And I hate being partnered with Sindelf here because he goes into this awful little spot between two people, and it gets worse sometimes because they're even closer and I have to like tiptoe my way in while not casting anything because he's a greedy tank. I wish we had 4 range so that Shin could just never get uptime, but it's whatever, it works. Right, Propeller Wind, we knew this mechanic from A11S, which was line of sighted behind one of the pillars that were in there. Obviously there's no towers that are destructible, so we know, we just use the frozen ice. Sorry, my voice just died. The frozen ice tower thing. And a dinky little line, which is terrifying, that if Phantom once said I could just murder everyone right now when he got up the front and he could just press propelling shot and just zipped straight through everyone in a pretty quick strike. Anyway, it all resolves very nicely, very cleanly. The reason we say stacked up on top of each other here is this timer and this timer often coincide very closely. So if you're not stacked on top of each other, you won't get that instant pass back and you'll die to the Gavel cast. So you'll see that Gavel just finished at less than a second on my buff. And if we passed a fraction of a second earlier and I wasn't stacked on top of him, I would have died. Gavel failed. Everyone's dead. Right, Gavel is an 8-man required alive. 8-man required with the right color matching the one they need. Yeah, it's very specific, the conditions that you need to succeed this mechanic, and if you fail them in the slightest, it's done. The rest of this phase is really just a victory lap. There's a different Photon here, which is tanks only, which is really just, you know, we're going to drop you to 1 HP before giving you a tank buster. That's all that it functions as. And then we learn how super jump functions. And it's important to notice this because it's very what's the word for it? Impactful in later phases how the new super jump functions in Ultimate. And it's that, and this scared the hell out of me a lot of times. He doesn't snapshot at the start of the cast, so I see super jump channeling and I see him looking at the tank and I think, oh, we just fucked this up, we're all dead, he's about to just jump on the spot and murder us all. But he doesn't. It in fact snapshots the furthest person away at the end of the cast bar. You also learn that after super jump, he casts Apocalyptic Ray. And Apocalyptic Ray is a retarget immediately after the super jump on the furthest person away. Right? Very important information for later on because both of these mechanics are, much like the rest of this phase, all about where on the map you can be. This one here has no other restrictions at the time, so it's kind of a lesson for later on. It's the way that Final Fantasy loves doing mechanics, where it gives you a simple example and then a complex example involving all the simple ones you've gotten before to piece together as a puzzle. Make it beam in my ear, it really was. Excuse me. And this is the simple example that we get now, where it simply jumps far away, turns, faces furthest away again, and murders everything that's within the cone in front of it. There's a double whirlwind, which is just a small healer check, and then you kill him at the same time. And now we get to Prime Phase. Oh, where to start with this? So, we expected something pretty major from this transition. And again, we got given sort of an introduction into how mechanics work in this phase. Temporal stasis was, I would say, the second hardest. Actually, I don't know. It was one of the hardest mechanics in Creator, in terms of positioning, in terms of putting together the puzzle. But this one resolves itself very cleanly. I'm not sure if that's a result of Kyo just being an absolute wizard when it comes to making a strategy for this type of thing, but this gave us no problems. We resolved it in, I think, 2 pulls, because the first one we didn't get enough information. Can confirm he's a wizard yet. Some of the Kyo strats in this phase in this entire fight were absolutely incredible. And this one that we have here, I would highly recommend to anyone who hasn't made a temporal stasis strategy already. It is extremely simple to execute, and very, I want to say forgiving. No, it's not forgiving, it's very intuitive. You don't have to use your brain. You don't have very arbitrary spots to run to on the map. Everything is based around the robots and simple. Right. So, for those who haven't done temporal stasis before, the way that it works is the cast bar finishes and you get frozen where you are and the mechanics resolve around you. Debuffs that go out. A short tether, which means you have to be within a certain distance of each other. A long tether, which is the blue one, which means you need to be a certain distance away from each other. 2 plaints of severity is the damage you take from it, I always forget what it's called. Which means that you can't take any other damage because it does single target damage and applies a magic vuln to you. And then 2 people with nothing. Right? And we all know all this already. These things all function the same as they did in Alexander many years ago. We weren't expecting any change from this. What makes this difficult is the way that the robots now function. Because this is what we're really being introduced to during this temporal stasis. Something else to note, and I didn't do it in our kill pool, which you're supposed to, is if you use cooldowns, when you go into temporal displacement, which is, you know, the time frozen buff, they freeze. See, I'm trying to hit my pot, but I was too late. So this is the Giga Brain pot right here. You use it before the time freeze, so then you don't have to use that extra OGCD immediately before Alex spawns, and you still get the same duration out of it. For jobs that are heavily OGCD before a boss spawns. So Black Mage, I need to sharp cast ley lines before Alex spawns in. If I do sharp cast and pot before he appears, all I need to do is ley lines and cast. It's very cool. Anyway, I was talking about how the robots act here. So this teaches us what the robots do. And the first time you get here, and you're doing it blind, ideally you want to be all spread out so you can learn what happens. So you'll see all the tethers resolving themselves, the planes of severity resolving themselves, and now the cleaves start. And you learn that Brute Justice is going to do 2 flamethrowers, and they target the closest 2 people to him in order. And you learn that Cruise Chaser is going to target the 3 people closest people to him in order of closest to furthest. All of these are mechanics to be used later on, but you can see that our positioning here makes it foolproof, right? It's very, very simple. GCD still roll? No, you can see it's actually freezing your GCD in temporal stasis. It doesn't even count down your cooldowns. So it's all about, it's not about getting extra uses of OGCDs, it's about reducing the OGCD bloat you have after the temporal stasis is why you use the pod there. But it also does, yeah, you can see there, it freezes the buff. That Medica 2 that was there for 3 seconds at the start ticks down the whole time while we were frozen. It's very, very cool. I love this mechanic and the way that it interacts with buffs. Okay, there goes Keo Strat. For anyone wanting it, I can link you the diagram. It's very simple though. You can like reverse engineer it just from what I showed you. Very, very, very intuitive, simple to execute. Great design. But again, this was sort of an introductory mechanic again. The only new things we learned were how cleaves function. And then we see the boy, and much like the Bahamut Prime phase in UCOB, Alexander Prime will come in, do a couple of a tank buster, maybe some cleaves, then he'll go away and do a trio. So this is just a burn phase, do as much damage as you can before stuff happens. Now, I'm assuming that everyone's watched Prog and knows how this particular mechanic is kind of the biggest bamboozle of the fight. Which, by the way, I'm gonna put this in the chat. This particular mechanic and the answer to Fate Calibration was, I can't believe this. The answer to Fate Calibration and what you're supposed to do in Inception formation was teased 2 years ago in an April Fool's trailer about Tactics Alexander. They released this little dinky fake game preview for Tactics Alexander, which I would have loved to play, by the way. But the answer was right in front of us all along. I can't believe that I missed it, because I've watched that trailer so many times. Yeah, I'm in awe. I don't know if that's intentional. I don't know if that's just like very fortunate that that happened. But really cool. Really, really cool. So Inception formation is really quite a trip. So your first instinct when you get to this phase is, we know how everything in this phase already functions because we've seen everything before. There is nothing new to learn. And that's kind of what trips you up, right? It's very much a mechanic in an entire phase which sort of preys on your own like cockiness, right? Like, oh, we've got this. This is going to be so easy because we already know everything. And when it comes to an ultimate, that's a really, really dangerous mindset to have, and unfortunately, everyone in the world fell for it. Oh, he's going to do Inception at the end. We need to use the Judgment Crystals to reveal his location. oh, these orbs need to be placed in a way to slow down the heart. We need to kill the heart because, you know, it's going to buff the boss. And ultimately, that was what walled everyone for various lengths of time, because in the end it really wasn't the truth. So what happens here, for those of you who aren't completely aware of what happens if you don't do the heart, the true heart is going to make a beeline for Alexander. If you don't slow him down, he arrives there in far too short of a time to actually kill him in time. But if he gets eaten by Alexander, or the heart goes into Alexander, he gets a damage up and a vuln down stack, which make the fight unkillable. He just one-shots everyone, and that's it. GG, game over. So what you do is place the green orbs to slow him down, kill the heart, never gets eaten, fight goes on. Inception resolves, yada yada yada. Cool, we're great. This mechanic was easy, look how good we are. You're wrong. And as we now know, the judgment crystals need to be hit by the true heart to give it 4 stacking vulnerability downs, which then turns it into the golden heart, which reveals Alexander's Inception position and gives everyone the Enigma Codex. It's written into the lore that Shinoa is the one who is in control of the Enigma Codex, so if Cheer was on the team, or if Cheer was, 9th manning for us, we would have known this even faster. But unfortunately, we had no lore buffs in our team, so we didn't get it from that. Alright, I think our strat is very elegant. I've seen other ones that, have required sprints or are very tight on timing. I really like this because there's nobody who takes a 60k Tetra Shatter, and the only tight timing is a 1 to 3 movement for the first tank flamethrower. Right, so you run right in between here, heart slowly goes up here, you wait for the first flamethrower to go off, and you run through it. So the third flamethrower is baited on Shinoa. Very simple. Second Tetra Shatter goes off, heart turns golden, and then all these tethers and debuffs that we've seen before, right? The only new one to the fight so far is this new shared sentence that comes out, but we learn pretty quickly that it's super shieldable, and in doing so we make this mechanic so easy. Please, if you haven't got a strat already for this, adopt this, because it means that you will always have one static person baiting Brute Justice every single time, and that static person isn't going to be a tank who has to pop cooldowns. I see groups that run strats which have a tank with a vuln throwing on a ton of mitigation and soaking a super jump from Brute Justice, and that's just it's very suboptimal and requires extra healing and resources being used. So what do? We 2-stack the shared sentence, right? And you'll see personal shields go up, you'll see Adlo goes up and a TBN from Sindelf, and all of a sudden our summoner is a fortress, right? So it's very simple. You 2-stack on the far side with the long tether and the shared sentence, and everyone else goes left. So in terms of execution, it's brain dead, and it means it's a buzzword at this point, but the thoughts per second is just so low, right? You don't have to think. You see, oh, the heart's going here, I run left or right, that's it. And then you do the same thing every time. The only exception is if you got the long tether. It means that Raimi's always inside, Kyo's always baiting Brute Justice jump, and all you need to do is adapt to where the map is right now. You look for Brute Justice because he always spawns in the same place in this phase, and position yourselves accordingly. What is important to note here is that these slashes, the order that they happen in is important, because if the tank gets hit last in these 3 slashes, his vulnerability, physical vuln, will still be around for when Alexander spawns again, and he'll instantly die. So you make sure he gets hit first or second, and it's okay. Right, and this is why it was important to note how super jump worked in the earlier phase. Because if this snapshot at the start of the cast bar, we're all dead. Right, it's almost impossible to dictate in a controlled way who that super jump's going to be on with the strat that we used if the super jump target snapshotted at the start of the cast bar instead of the end. So it's really utilizing the way that mechanics now work to create a strategy around it which is very favourable. And you can see Kyo with no vulnerability, full HP because he hasn't taken damage since the Tetra Shatter and the Flamethrower. Very, very simple. Alright, same thing again. Big burn phase. Tank Buster and some cleaves. This is Bahamut Prime's phase 2.0, except deaths matter. I did forget to mention, sorry, I had a mouthful of water, the timing of these cleaves is different this time. So it involves voking off for the last cleave onto the off tank, which if you watched the stream yesterday I forgot about and got myself killed. Don't be me, use your brain. Have that always be a static position, which is very easy to do because it's a static position from where Brute Justice jumped from. Sweating, look at that polyglot. Yeah, that was consistent. Because of our push timing on the earlier phases, that would always happen. My first G City would be a Xenoglossy right there. Let's ask an off-topic question why you murdered that red mage weapon. So I kind of made a meme of it, but the short answer is that I played so poorly, I really don't feel like I deserved it. So I just decided to make a joke of it and discard it. Mainly because I personally dislike red mage, not because I think it's a trash job. I have trauma from being forced into that job all throughout Stormblood because of the way that encounters were designed and red mage was designed. So it's given me personal beef with the job. Don't take it as a, you know, you can't play this job, it sucks. It's just, I just really dislike it. Notice I didn't thunder much. It's all about uptime, right? Thunder is really, like, the actual application of casting thunder, hard casting it, is a loss. It's only a gain when you get procs, but it's a significant gain when you do. So because the phases are so short here, the reproc and reapplying thunder isn't going to give you that value, right? Because you need the dot to tick down. So it's much better and much safer to just cast fire. And here we have Wormhole formation. And I'm probably going to do a video on this whole mechanic by itself and give everyone POVs and our triggers that we used for this. Because I think a consistent and unified strategy for everyone to use is going to be key to getting pug groups or, like, you know, mishmashed groups of people through this fight. Because right now this is it. This is the fight right here. Wormhole is the hardest mechanic in the game to execute, and it's also the one that I've seen the most strategy for in the game. There are so many variations in the way you can do it, some of them more consistent than others, but ultimately, and the way that we found it went in terms of progging this phase and getting good at it is you pick one and you get really good at it and you make sure that everyone knows it, or else you're going to be wiping forever. If you change strats in Wormhole, you have to go through that whole cycle again of everyone learning one of the 16 permutations that you can get. So every time you change strategy with Wormhole, you're setting yourself back so far in progression. You have no idea how it works? Okay, I can sort of give you our thought process and how we solved it. And it's very similar to what I was saying earlier about Missy, right? But to start with, I'll play through the mechanic and we'll go over the basis of the mechanic and what actually goes on, and then the specifics, right, about the timing and the positioning. Because everything is important in this phase. There's nothing in here that is unimportant to the way that everything else functions. It's like a machine, right? Each single little piece of it has to be working in synergy with the others, or else everyone dies. Right, numbers over your head. Everyone knows how limit cut works from the first transition. This is the first time we're seeing Void of Repentance in this fight. The first time we're seeing it since A12S. If you'd done your homework, you knew how this worked. It had to be soaked. Not soaking a Void of Repentance meant bad things were happening, but also soaking Void of Repentance gave you a Vaughn. Right, so that meant that timing of taking Void of Repentance was important. And because there are other static things in terms of timing in this fight, it gave you a little bit of a hint as to how this mechanic is going to resolve. Brute Justice did a super jump, we know how that functions. Chakrams happened, we know how those function. Sacrament, we know how that functions as well because of all the research we did into A12, right? And I mean, it's not really that difficult, it's just get out of the middle and don't be down here. So it's all things we already know. What we don't know though is how to piece it all together. And for virtually everyone, this was the first wall in the fight. And it's still a wall for many, many people. It is. I'm not understating it when I say that this is the hardest mechanic in the game, because it is, absolutely. So I'm going to let this play out, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail as to why we do things the way that we do. I think now isn't the time for a 30-minute video on only Wormhole, unless everyone wants it, but I'll give you guys a little bit more of a deeper understanding into what just happened. Okay, so static things that happen. Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser are always north. Unfortunately, the way that they spawn is dynamic. So Cruise Chaser can be on the left here and Brute Justice can be on the right. Or Brute Justice can be on the right. Or vice versa. I can't remember what I said first. Right, so we see limit cuts, we know link ups coming out. The link up cast bar that Brute Justice did is the snapshot for chakrams. Numbers go out. Okay, so what I said before in the Missy phase about the way that I personally like to resolve mechanics is build around things that you know for certain, right? And there are very fixed constants in this phase. Those being the timing of the Void of Repentance, the timing of the Sacrament, the timing of the limit cuts, the timing of the Brute Justice super jump, the timing of the chakrams, the timing of the Apocalyptic Ray finishing. Everything else is dynamic, and that's all based on where you stand, right? So the only thing that you really have control of in this fight is who soaks things and where they soak it. Right, so the first thing that we figured out, and I think this is key to result to figuring out how to properly solve this mechanic, is that you have to have 5 and 6 take the first soak, 7 and 8 take the second soak, and 1 and 2 take the third. And we learned that very early on, thankfully, because we saw the timings and how things would line up and the duration of the Voln from the Void soak, which meant that we could then build around it. Baiting the Brute Justice super jump is also very important in knowing the size of the Apocalyptic Ray, but ultimately that doesn't play into how this mechanic functions at all, right? It's just something extra you have to account for with where people do their limit cuts. Right, so you'll see 5 and 6 taking the first soak. R is 6? 5? I don't know what numbers we are here. Right, so this is the timing that I was talking about, right? So 5 and 6 taking the first one means that he soaks, he goes to a dedicated safe spot to do his limit cut, where nobody else is going to be, and then you swap out. Limit cuts are always done in the same spot for the 5, 6, 7, 8. For everyone else, limit cuts are done on diagonals that don't impact anyone else. Go through it one more time so you'll see the movement, right? After the chakrams go off, cardinals are safe, and the cardinals are the red dots. So he does his limit cut in between cardinals. And that's the 8th charge. Right, everyone's taken damage. Here we have another DPS all putting their self shields up. Again, just this composition is incredibly good for this fight. So good. For an 8-man stack marker, which does about 800,000 damage, I want to say. So it needs shields, a little bit of mit. And then enumerations. And this functions exactly the same as the previous one, right? Where it's 2 random DPS get a 3 soak. So you always have tanks and healers, 1 in each. And the DPS are dynamic here. And you can use the same positioning rules that you did in the Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser phase, where you number yourselves 1 through 4 and you adjust left or right. Very simple, but difficult in execution, I would say. There's a lot of tight specific timing and reactive movement. I'd say one of the hardest parts of this is what you're about to see happen right here. Sucker, Cure 3, Indom, which also procs the Divine Veil. Getting that mid up in time after everyone's stacked in the middle, because you have to wait for the 8th limit cut dash, takes good healers, and we're very fortunate to have very good healers. Because that's a lot of damage. I had... How much in shields did I have just then? Yeah, I have another 45,000 HP in shields, and I took 40-ish K. Yeah, so I took about 85k damage. It hurts a lot. And then we have not Tank Buster. He does 2 raid wides this time, and these ones hurt. Everyone stacks under the skirt, gets topped. This is really great, by the way, that Adel and Reprisal can cover both Mega Holies. Please make use of it, help your healers. Mega Holy hurts so much. I've seen a lot of people die to this just due to not respecting it. You need to be topped, you need shield, and you need mit. It hurts real bad. And having healer deaths at this point, or healers running out of MP, is simply not okay. Because there's about to be a lot of healer MP spent coming up very soon. Right, Mega Holy is straight from A12S, I shouldn't need to explain that too much. And then we go into one of the coolest parts of the fight, I'd say visually. This is just a really badass phase right here. And there's a lot of nuance that goes into something that is very simply just a burn. Right, you got a 2-target burn. One of them is doing a 25-second cast Eternal Darkness. The other one is doing, well, the last one is doing a 75-second cast Divine Judgment, and you have a stacking, persistent raid damage J-Waves. So we all know how J-Waves works. We know that Eternal Darkness is a Harden Rage, we know that Divine Judgment is a Harden Rage, so it's about managing to kill both of these, Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser, efficiently, while 1, not letting J-Wave stack too high, and 2, not letting the Eternal Darkness go off. So, how do you do that? And this is something that I don't see many teams doing at the moment, but I'm sure that they'll pick up on it in terms of optimization. It's very simple, is that the requirement needed to beat a 25-second Eternal Darkness cast is only about 65,000 raid DPS. When you consider that right now, most party comps burst about 110, 120, 130k raid DPS, you'll realize how much you don't actually need to do to Cruise Chaser to kill him before the Eternal Darkness happens. So to get through this check and be really efficient with your damage, you should be double dotting, right? My first GCD is a Thunder on Brute Justice, and other people are also putting up dots here. Then you want to utilize your raid buffs on Cruise Chaser. So you're utilizing this 15 seconds here of single target. But effectively, the way that it plays out is you want Cruise Chaser to die as late into this cast bar as possible. You want to get like that E, that S, and you want to kill it around there. That way you're putting as much damage into Brute Justice as you can before Cruise Chaser dies, because Cruise Chaser's doing no damage. The time that he dies in, all that matters is that it's before this goes off. But Brute Justice, you don't want those high stack J-Waves. Your healers will hate you, and you're probably gonna die. So now you'll see we peel off and we swap over to Brute Justice while this is still going off. Let dots tick down, and he gets finished off. And I misplay my MP and lose a despair, but whatever. Something else to note, and this is actually quite important, is that Addle works on J-Waves now. Previously it was darkness damage, so it could only be mitigated by percentage damage, not magic damage or physical damage, only percentage damage mitigations, things like soil, things like wings, but now you can Addle it. Another reason again that Double Caster is very, very good for this fight. Dark Missionary obviously works as well. It's a lot of magic damage, but it's also a lot of damage going out to us. Right here. And then you have the resolution of the phase, which is killing him before the 75-second Divine Judgment cast goes off. But because you're actually finishing the boss that you are hitting the entire phase here, the amount of damage that you did in all those other phases in between the trios, right, so after you've done the temporal stasis before you go into Inception formation, all that damage matters. After you get out of Inception formation before you go into Wormhole formation, all that damage matters. So it really punishes deaths that you have in those formations, by meaning you have more HP left to burn at the end of this phase. Compare that to Bahamut Prime is the best example of, where you go in and out of trios and then you've got to get it down to 60% before Grand Octet finishes. This is so much more punishing. You have a real check to meet here, and deaths are heavily punished, and I think this is just a much better sort of design choice. What's the limit in health he can have? He has 1 HP. He stops at 1 HP. You effectively need to kill him. Oh, do you mean how much he can have maximum? I don't know how much we've ever had him at, and it all depends on your composition as well in terms of what CDs you have available at the end. But unfortunately you don't want to be using those CDs here. You'll notice when I start playing it again that I'm not using Convert, that we didn't use BV. We're pulling our cooldowns, we time our pot so that we're not using it here. Essentially you want to save as many cooldowns while still getting this killed, which is what we do. So good DPS throughout the phase is very important and actually rewarded. It's great because the further you are ahead, that means you can pull damage. See, I'm sitting on 2 polyglot stacks at the end of this. I'm sure Shin is sitting at 100 Ninki. I'm sure that our summoner is all prepped with 2 Ether Flow and ready to go. All of this is a setup for the last phase, because the last phase is where damage really matters. And because we had more comfort in this phase, obviously the damage came more freely here, and we were able to manipulate and take things away from previous phases and move it later on. Great stuff. Can't use an LB earlier as you don't have tank LB3 for the Divine Judgment cast. Also, by the way, when you do push him, he immediately cancels his cast and goes into Divine Judgment, so you can shorten the phase by doing that instead of sitting there hitting him at 1%. It's cool, I like that. Right, this is a very familiar scene. Divine Judgment being cast. Lets you know exactly how long you've got to sit down for as well. Dude, that timing. DJ Bell, you're on fire. It's just so damn cool. Big power stance, wings come out. You know this guy's here to fuck. Anyway. We got Perfect Alexander, and the very first thing I said when I saw this guy is, oh my god, he's enormous, because look at the size of that hitbox, right? You can max melee to about here-ish, which means that you've only got this amount of the room where you can't actually hit him. It's a very large boss. He occupies a lot of space, and he occupies a lot of camera space, which means that you have to actively look around the room. So now we're going to learn about the mechanics that happen in this phase. And the way that Square loves to do things, and we've been over this a couple of times in this fight alone, is it'll introduce you to mechanics with a very simple example first. And that is no different here. You'll see that we saved all our CDs for right here, so we've got a full opener going on, and then we see the first mechanic, the final word. And what the final word is going to do is it's going to put a series of debuffs on players. And when they come out, I will explain them all to you, because these are all brand new. Everything that functions in here is different from any other fight in the game. Cool. New stuff. It's not just recycled. So what do we got? We have 2 debuffs, which are similar but different from all the other ones. 3 the same, 3 the same. And the way that it really functions is the light with the arrow will run towards the light without the arrow. The dark with the arrow will run away from the dark without the arrow. But if the darks with the arrows get too far away from the dark without the arrow, I'm going to refer to it as what we did from now on. You are a dark beacon, light, or light beacon. That's what we call it. If the darks get too far away from the dark beacon, they die immediately. If the lights touch the light beacon, they die instantly. So you have to resolve all this in a way which doesn't conflict with those things, but because this is again just the introductory to the mechanic, it's very simple. Not too much difficulty in execution. But then they throw in this little sneaky one right here, Ordained Motion, or Ordained Stillness. And that's very simply a stop moving or be moving mechanic. A good old Blighted Bouquet, the hardest mechanic in the game, because people love to push buttons and don't like to not push buttons, and everyone in the game is guilty of dying to this. And this happens while you're positioning yourself for mechanics, and it also happens while you're doing your opener. Do not greet GCDs if it's Ordained Stillness first. You are griefing your team. Debuff timers end, mechanics resolve. Beacons stand still, everyone moves to or away from them. Hooray, mechanic resolved. The opposite of what he used first happens next. So he used motion first before the mechanic resolution. He uses stillness afterwards. If he used stillness first, motion would be afterwards. Very easy to plan for, very easy to play around. Respect these mechanics. Right? Don't grief your team. Be a safe boy. Dead people do no damage. And now we come to the new Optical site. Right, so he's absorbed Brute Justice and Cruise Chaser and Alexander Prime, so of course some of their mechanics are going to come back up. And the way that these ones work is it can be a random spread or stack. The stacks unfortunately can be on anyone, so you need to spread in a way that can allow you to adjust to anybody getting the stack and have very set rules for who adjusts. Fortunately, you can 3-stack and survive. Unfortunately, getting information from this mechanic was very difficult, because if you messed up the first mechanic and we're getting here with very few people, they have an anti-sack mechanic on these stack markers. Which means if a stack marker goes off on one person, everyone's dead. It's great. I'm not sure if it's if it kills people. I think it's only if it goes off on one person that faithlessness happens. But mechanic failure on this is essentially a wipe, because faithlessness does a lot of damage. Yeah. Is it if it kills the player? No, I'm pretty sure it's only if it goes off on one player. Essentially, yes, it's an anti-cheese mechanic. But yes, the order of these is random, whether it's spread or stack first. And what else is cool about this is that these 8 targeted ones, the spread out, always go off. And when they say they always go off, I mean 8 always go off. Which means that if there are 7 people alive, 2 of them are going on one random person, which means they die because it gives you a magic vuln. And what's also important to note is that these magic vulns mean that if a tank is taking magic damage through it, and vulns don't work, you die. I mentioned that in the first phase, that later on there were issues with being multi-hit by abilities you shouldn't, and vulns not working. I'm pretty sure this is another example of it. Which is great. They've really gone the route of anti-cheese, because they, funnily enough, Alexander was very heavily cheesed. Now we're getting to the cool part. Anyone notice that he looks a bit brighter than usual? Anyway, fate projection and fate calibration. And what you're seeing now is not what anyone saw the first time they got there. When you first get here and you don't have the codex, you don't see these robots. You don't see this tether that you have. You don't see the clone. All you see is Perfect Alexander standing in the middle for about 22-23 seconds, channeling a obscenely long cast, and then you die shortly afterwards. Fortunately, we're after prog, and we're looking at this video from the eyes of people who know what happened, so I don't need to sit here and go through that pain and that learning process again. But what happens to happen here is essentially, and I love this, I think this is a beautiful mechanic. What's happening during fate calibration is he is predicting the future. This little clone that comes out, that's what you're going to do in the future. And he's saying, I see your moves, I'm going to counter it and I'm going to kill you. And here's how it's going to happen, right? So you'll see here, he gave defamation to someone. That's going to kill everyone. That's his move. He's saying, alright, I'm going to wipe you with this. I'm going to wipe you with this. See, I got a plaint of severity. And I'm going to kill you with this. Right? So there was a don't move, a defamation, a stack marker, plaint of severity, and then a move. That's how he plans to kill us in the future. If we didn't have the codex, we wouldn't be able to see this. Fortunately we do, so we can counter him, we can change our fate. And that's what makes this, I think, such a beautiful mechanic, is that it really plays into the lore, as well as being just visually incredible, and the fact that it's a puzzle when you first get here and have no idea what is happening, just thematically amazing. I dislike how we got the heart, or the codex, but that's irrelevant to what this mechanic is standalone. It is just, it's incredible. This is visually and thematically one of my favorite things in this entire game. Right? Sacraments as well. I forgot to mention that. Yeah. So there's a safe spot to resolve all of that in. So remember what I said, that we had to do a standstill. I had a plaint of severity, which means I need to be out of the stack. The defamation needs to be opposite, which will be up here behind his little skirt. the stack marker will be over here, and the planes of severity, the single targets, will be over here. And all of these mechanics resolve as soon as he teleports away. This is the future. He's seen how we're going to move, but now we're going to change it. Now we're going to do things correctly so that he can't kill us. There we go, we did it. We changed our fates. And much like they love doing in this Alexander fight, they like doing huge mechanic set followed by a tank buster followed by huge mechanic set, and that's no different here again. Perfect Alexander is accurate to their formula of this fight. Not that it's a bad thing. It means that progression steps are very important, and you progressing through it feels really fulfilling, right? You reach new milestones very clearly, and the information you can get feels just good to get, right? The first time you see Beta, you're like, God, we finally made it through. It's great. And then you get to Fate Projection Beta. You have to move as much if you can keep track of the clone. You do need to move because often your clone will run through the boss and you can't see anything. Okay, so now we have the same thing happening again, right? He's calculating our futures. And the debuffs that we see on our clones are what we are viewing using the Enigma Codex. So I'm seeing that he's going to put a light buff on me. There's a light beacon over here. I have to not die to getting close to that. We also have to resolve this long tether. I want to find a better picture. This short tether, these darks, and a dark beacon, and also the stack marker, and then super jumps, right? And we know how super jumps work is that they snapshot at the end of the cast bar, same as the rest of the fight, but different to every other fight, but we have to look at the context of now. I think they're called J-jump in this phase, which is cool. Right, super jumps happen, and then we have a random optical sight, which you can see, if I just go back a little bit, at the top of my screen, up here, and it's either a stack or a spread. So he's using Brute Justice's mechanics, he's using Alexander Prime's mechanics, sorry, Perfect Alexander's mechanics, and he's using Cruise Chaser's mechanics. Just the combination, this is the pinnacle of all of his power combined, while still reading the future and throwing everything he's got at you. Very cool. Oh yeah, and there's Radiant Sacrament, which happened off screen because I wasn't looking for it, so I had to listen to the raid call out. But the Radiant Sacrament that happens is from one of these Perfect Alexanders that did a J-jump onto someone. So you can mark it because it's going to be roughly around where it was during the jump. Where's the perfect limit card? God, no. Alright, and now we have the same thing again. He's seen the futures. He's going to go and test it now. He's going to run us through. We're going to see if we've changed our fate using the Enigma Codex, resolve our debuffs in a way that doesn't get us killed. Lights and darks move. Tethers resolve. Stack resolves. J-jumps. Spread mechanic. That was the next thing, right? The optical sight. It was either a stack or a spread. We saw that it was a spread. Spread out. We marked this one is going to use the Radiant Sacrament. There's a C on it. Spread out, and then get in for the Radiant Sacrament. Another really cool mechanic. Again, I said earlier on that Kyo was playing out of his mind this tier. We got to that mechanic the first time we had the Enigma Codex. We came back through here, we got through Alpha with the Enigma Codex with only 3 deaths. We got to Beta with 8 people alive. We saw all the footage and Kyo made a strategy that worked first time for Fate Calibration Beta. Just, this man's brain is insane. And it's part of the reason that we got through this last phase so quickly. Yes, now we have the victory lap, right? So there's Tank Buster again, the same as before. What people don't realize is that this is essentially a Tank Buster exactly the same as the Tank Buster from A12S in the final phase, but nobody handled it properly back then. The way that Holy Scourge and, what was it called, Incinerating Heat, I want to say, worked was it started off with a multi-hit Tank Buster, and that multi-hit Tank Buster was 2-target. You put 2 tanks together and mitigate it, and then it's a 1-target Tank Buster which applies a Vom. So it's a forced tank swap. No, nobody ever did it back then, Co. It was... nobody knew, right? Because it's not something you want to test when you're that deep into a fight, right? Especially in A12S, which was long, and you didn't want to throw away something that was that deep into a fight. And then the tank swap. Good stuff, we made it through beta, and now we have essentially the victory lap. Almighty Judgment is Exaflare mixed with Trines, but you have to do Mornifar during it, is the best way that I can explain this phase. There is a set pattern to the way that the Trines move. There are 3 set spawn locations, but we didn't know that when we did this. We played very reactively, just due to my team. These players are insanely good. Like, I just got carried through all this by following Keo, and I think a few of us did as well, but we'd mark a spot on the ground and Keo would tell us when to move, and we just did it. And you'll see how it functions. So I'm pretty sure if you don't have the codex, you don't see these telegraphs, right? So, you know, people are always like, oh yeah, let's just run RNG runs until we can get a non-codex clear. I'm pretty sure you can do alpha and beta, get them perfectly right with the 1 in however million chance that you've got of doing that perfectly, and then you're going to die to this because you can't see the telegraphs and you don't know how to do a movement. So you can see where the AoEs are going to go off, the order that they're going to go off, but these AoEs are huge. So they have a lot of overlap, so moving into the dead center of one is important. You know, Keo marked C, move into it as soon as it goes off, and then we have the Mornifar, right? Irresistible Grace, cast bar is finishing. It's got Mit, it's got shields. It's like a 850, 900k damage stack that had shields, 10% on it, and I live with 6000 HP. Yes, I moved too early. In the first one, I can show you why I died. That's your cue to move on the first one. On the second one, that's not your cue to move, it happens a little later, which I didn't realize until that very run. Anyway, I was too focused on dodging and I nearly dropped an Oaken, but I didn't. But that's the way that everyone should play this. Not dropping your rotation, but respecting mechanics. Death is a bigger DPS loss than that 1 GCD you might lose by, you know, over-respecting mechanics. Just to give light to how much I'm respecting this mechanic, I want you to see how many instant casts I use in a row. Right? My triple cast times out, even though I'm chain casting this entire time, because I have so many instant casts available for this mechanic. I've used over 15 seconds of instant cast, that's how much I pull. Don't fail mechanics, that's the most important thing. Alright, Sindelf died because we weren't prepared and we're dumb. But essentially it didn't matter because our damage was good. We have high damage as a team. This composition is stacked for damage. So I didn't really think it was some failing mechanic. You forgot to put up Mit. Would you call it? I suppose that is failing mechanic. But it's a necessary sacrifice. And then it happens again, except this time the floor's shaking because Alexander, you can see in the top of my screen there, is coming out. And unfortunately in my POV you can't see him, but he looks really cool. So you see, this time that fist punching down isn't the cue, it happens later this time. So that's why I died yesterday, but same again, right? Move when you see the AoEs go off. Did I already talk about any decision making that went into selecting these specific jobs? I'll talk about that after we're done here because we're close. Same thing again, Irresistible Grace goes off, high damage, we have a lot of shielding this time, a lot of mit. We got Soil, Addle, Missionary, Reprisal, Troubadour. This one's heavily mitigated. The last one was I think 10% in a shield and I live with 6k HP. Which would mean that I have about 110k effective HP plus the 10%. Yeah, it's about 900, 950, maybe even 1,000,000 damage, the stack, which is then split 8 ways. Also Veil and Passage. Yeah, I didn't see Arms Up, it's there. Right, so it's a lot of mit. So this one's a lot safer, but the first one was under-mitigated and very nearly wiped us. Respect the mechanic, it does a lot of damage. There's never been a stack marker that does that much damage in the game. Well, a stack mechanic. Mornifar's probably the closest it gets, but you don't have to be moving while that goes off. Also, the damage value, literally saying it does 1,000,000 damage is just daunting. And now we've resolved that, it is a burn. This is the end of the fight. And it is pretty. Thank you, DJ Bell. I don't believe it. And like I said, we smoked this check. We were 25 seconds ahead of Enrage. Yes, I skipped the cutscene because I wanted to upload the screenshot to Twitter before Sindolf. Because he stole my clout in Eden, so sorry bud, you snooze you lose. That's me taking a screenshot right there, you saw it, boom, done. I was literally in tears taking a screenshot so I could post it on Twitter. It's kind of sad to say. Anyway, that's the fight, that's everything.